feel another graphic organizer growing, so I'm just going to do it. I'm going to go for it. So, energy, oops, I know how to spell energy. Energy sources. Right, we mentioned CP, right? And this is the idea of CP plus ADP equals ATP. Right. We also have glycolysis, which is what we're talking about right now. Right, in glycolysis, it's anaerobic, so there's no oxygen required. And it's just breaking down glucose into something called pyruvate. And it can create like 2 ATP. Now usually what would happen in a cell that kind of isn't in much of a hurry to get all of this energy is this pyruvate goes on and creates even more ATP energy through cellular respiration and electron transport chain, all of those things that you're probably a little bit familiar with. But in the process of glycolysis, that's all we're doing is breaking down glucose to get 2 ATP. So the problem here is that 2 ATP is not going to get you very far, right? That's like 1 turn of the sodium-potassium pump, and then you got to do it again, right? And you're using a whole glucose molecule, right? It's kind of like, I'm thinking of my daughter. Sometimes, this time of year, I have all these big, juicy apples sitting on my counter, and one of the things she likes to do, if you've ever lived with like a little kid, they just like take one little bite, and then they sit it there, and I'm like, you wasted the whole apple. It's kind of like this, right? They're wasting the whole apple here. You have this whole glucose molecule you can get all this energy from, but you're throwing the whole apple away just so you can get 2 ATP, right? Because the cell's not able to break down that pyruvate. So, and the reason glucose is there is because your muscle cells store glucose in the form of glycogen, right? So glucose is kind of sitting around in its stored form. So we can add this here, right? Glucose from glycogen, right? Because your muscle fibers store glycogen, right? Your liver and your muscle fibers store glycogen. So as I said, this is all happening in anaerobic conditions. And when pyruvate develops and accumulates, this pyruvate gets converted into lactic acid. And so this is that lactic acid fermentation. This is that burning sensation that you feel. You know that your body's depleted in ATP and doesn't have enough oxygen when you start feeling the burn, right? You could feel the burn from sometimes like carrying a whole lot of groceries in, like I'm only gonna take 1 trip. I'm gonna look like a packed mule, but I'm gonna do it, right? And by the time you get to your door, you're like your arms are burning, right? Sometimes it happens like walking up a flight of stairs or running or whatever, right? Depending on what kind of shape you're in, right? Lactic acid will accumulate. That's that burning sensation. The lactic acid gets converted back by the liver. So lactic acid actually enters your blood, right? Which is dangerous to have acid in your blood, right? It's going to lower your blood pH, which is why your body doesn't like to do this. If you have too much lactic acid in your blood, it can lower the pH of your blood a little too much. Right? So it's going to enter the blood and it's going to get converted back into pyruvate by the liver. Your liver processes it. Your liver, I just wrote liver processes, but your liver processes it back and turns it back into pyruvate. So this is that process here. Right? We like to take glucose, use it to make some ATP. Sometimes if there's energy or oxygen available, we can do other things like oxidative energy. So we can add that to our little source. Right, this is that electron transport chain. And citric acid cycle. This happens in the mitochondria of the cell, and it requires oxygen. But that's not always available. So this can produce lots of ATP, like 30 ATP. instead of just 2. So that oxidative catabolism, it can use any molecule. It doesn't have to just use glucose. So traditionally, in traditional biology classes, you'll learn that, oh, you know, glucose is broken down and the pyruvate enters the citric acid cycle, electron transport chain makes 30 ATP. But amino acids and fatty acids can also do the same thing, right? So amino acids and fatty acids can also undergo oxidative catabolism and create lots of ATP. So it's not just glucose that can do that. There's lots of other fuel sources that your body can use. And those fuel sources are going to vary based on your diet, what you're putting into your body, which is why some diets like the keto diet or high protein diets, right, they can work, they can give you energy. You're just training your body to use a different energy source, right? So the oxidative catabolism is the predominant way of getting the majority of your ATP for most of the time. But if you're doing a sustained activity for a very long time, your oxygen levels are going to get lower. That's just naturally what happens, and you're going to run out of ATP. So eventually, you'll resort to one of the other ways of getting energy. Right? In oxidative energy catabolism, electrons are basically coming out of the food molecules and being passed to these kind of electron holders, if you will. And there's this whole physiology piece that goes with it. What you really need to know is that it's all dependent upon oxygen, right? We're not going to get into the physiology of the oxidative catabolism here because we're going to get into an AMP2. But what you need to know is that it requires oxygen. And your muscles have a very special molecule in them that helps them store oxygen. So not only do your muscles store glycogen, right, and store creatine phosphate, but your muscles also store something called myoglobin. Myoglobin is a reddish pigment molecule, and it helps store oxygen. So it's kind of like a derivative of hemoglobin. It kind of even sounds the same. And it's going to hold extra oxygen. Have you ever heard of athletes like super training and like low atmospheric pressure environments, like they'll go up into the mountains and run or train in those hypobaric chambers, right? What they're doing is they're loading up their body with oxygen and boosting up their myoglobin stores, right? That's why they do that, so that they can outrun, you know, outjump, out whatever, the people that don't do that. It really does help myoglobin store that that oxygen. And the more oxygen you have, right, the more oxidative catabolism you can do, the more oxidative catabolism you can do, the more ATP you can do, the more ATP you can make, the more you can use your muscle fibers, right? So it's all interrelated. So this is just a picture showing all of those ways of getting them. Of course, I mentioned already creatine supplementation, using creatine as a supplement. So usually people will take creatine phosphate as a supplement, like a protein shake or whatever, to help them build muscle or help them perform better, like at the gym or, you know, on the field, right, to give them more energy. So it can work, you know, if you get the right supplement, they can work. Again, I'm always skeptical about supplements because a lot of them you just pee right out. But some of them, the ones that are good, your body will absorb them and you will see benefits from them. But absorbing creatine in high dosage can cause some side effects as well. Weight gain and water retention, you'll start to look a little puffy. And massive dosage can even cause kidney damage because of the water retention, right? You have so much extra fluid built up in your body, it's putting stress on your kidneys. So it can be dangerous to take any sort of supplement, which is why it's always important to talk to your doctor or your caregiver, whoever's, you know, overseeing those types of things. Skeletal muscles have a maximum capacity for creatine, just like they have a maximum capacity for glycogen. They don't have an endless reserve, right? There's a limit to how much they can store. So taking supplements might not even do you any good if your stores are already full, right? It's like you can't shove anything into a drawer that's already full, right? If the pocket's already full, you can't fit anything else in there, right? And so that's always important to take a look at. So let me see. So I think I'm going to stop here. It just kind of makes sense in terms of the flow of everything, and we'll wrap up this lecture on Thursday. That way we ended a little bit early so you can go to bones if you need to. And so your quiz on Thursday will cover these things.